Elite talent has a way of making people uncomfortable. When someone arrives and completely changes the standards of an established system, it forces everyone around them to reevaluate what they thought was possible. For more than 2 decades, the NBA functioned within a familiar structure. The league's icons held the spotlight. Influential voices in the media helped shape the narrative, and newcomers were generally expected to stay patient, earn their place, and avoid drawing too much attention to themselves. But Caitlin Clark was never the type of player who was going to quietly blend into the background. She entered the league carrying unprecedented attention, massive fan interest, and a level of basketball IQ that immediately separated her from the crowd. From the moment she stepped onto a Wemby court, it was clear she wasn't just another rookie. She was a game-changing figure capable of reshaping conversations around the entire league. As her influence continued to grow, resistance seemed to grow right alongside it. What we're seeing now feels like an intense battle over the narrative surrounding one of the biggest stars the sport has ever produced. Critics aren't satisfied with simply challenging her performance between the lines. Increasingly, the focus appears to be on questioning her character, scrutinizing her every move, and testing her confidence away from the games itself. The goal isn't only to compete against Caitlin Clark, it's to bring her back down to earth and remind her that many people believe she rose too high, too fast.
What happened in that moment is I was challenging a player. It's coaching. It's what it is. I don't often think it becomes an issue if you're watching it in men's sports most of the time. And my relationship with Caitlin is great. Like, I love Caitlin. I ride with her. Like, we have a great relationship. And I think that the narrative of people trying to make it something that it's not is just, taking sensationalism to try to get some clicks and all the other stuff. She wants to be coached. I want her to help me be a better.
So we're blaming social.
It starts with some of the most respected figures in the sport, the trailblazers who helped build women's basketball into what it is today. Yet there are moments when certain reactions suggest discomfort with just how much attention the league's newest superstar is attracting. Consider Cheryl Miller, one of the most influential names in basketball history. Recently, her public comments sparked significant debate among fans and analysts alike. At one point, there were warm interactions and visible support during All-Star festivities. Not long afterward, however, Miller openly discussed Caitlin Clark's emotional reactions on the sidelines, suggesting that elite players must handle adversity differently and display a stronger championship mindset when challenges arise. To many supporters of Clark, the criticism felt familiar. Competitive intensity that might be praised in established stars was suddenly being framed as a flaw when displayed by a young player still early in her professional career. As public reaction intensified, the conversation began to shift. The criticism softened, the messaging became more measured, and the overall tone appeared far more forgiving than before. But by then, the original comments had already made headlines and fueled weeks of discussion. What many fans saw was an attempt to scrutinize Clark's visible passion and emotional investment in the game, the very traits that have defined countless legendary competitors' relentless drive, frustration with losing, and an obsession with winning were being examined under a different lens. Whether fair or not, the debate highlighted a larger question surrounding Clark's rise. Why does the same competitive fire that is often celebrated in sports sometimes become controversial when she displays it?
Horseshit.
Better coach. We're both competitive. We're both stubborn. We're more alike than different. Hopefully we continue to bring the best out of each other.
More alike than different.
But the debate doesn't stop with former players and basketball icons. The far greater influence often comes from the media figures who control much of the public conversation. These are the reporters, commentators, and analysts with national platforms, the people whose opinions are amplified across television, podcasts, and major sports outlets. Lately, some of the discussion surrounding Caitlin Clark has left many fans shaking their heads. Instead of focusing strictly on her impact on the court, certain media conversations have drifted into territory that critics view as increasingly disconnected from reality. In one recent podcast discussion, what was expected to be serious basketball analysis quickly turned into a controversial debate that sparked widespread reaction among listeners. Perhaps the most surprising part was that respected journalists openly entertained the idea of taking Caitlin Clark out of the lineup and reducing her role. For many observers, the suggestion felt less like a thoughtful basketball argument and more like an example of how polarizing Clark has become. The fact that such a proposal was being discussed on major sports platforms immediately fueled backlash and raised questions about whether the conversation had shifted from objective analysis to something far more personal.
Talking to Sophie about just the level of frustration with the group right now. You guys had a meeting yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
How would you assess where the mood is
Kelsey
at
say?
with the team and how you guys move on from those two losses?
How y'all know we had a meeting?
Sophie told us.
I think it's a part of being a family, you know.
And so they had a team meeting. So if this was not an issue, why would y'all have a team meeting? Now I gotta go.
Think about what that argument actually implies. The idea being floated wasn't about sitting an average player. It was about sidelining the athlete who has become one of the biggest attractions in the sport. The player helping drive record crowds, unprecedented attention, and non-stop conversation around the league. Yet some commentators openly suggested that moving her out of the starting lineup in favor of a reserve guard could serve as a valuable lesson. Their message was clear. Caitlin Clark needs to be reminded that the spotlight does not belong to her alone. They argued that she should scale back her expectations, stay within certain boundaries, and accept limits that others believe should be placed on her rise. But to many fans, this goes far beyond ordinary basketball discussion. Notice what is missing from the conversation. The debate is not centered on defensive schemes, offensive efficiency, or tactical adjustments. Instead, the focus seems to be on Clark herself, her influence, her popularity, and the enormous attention she attracts. For critics of these media narratives, the underlying message feels impossible to ignore. If success makes you too visible, too influential, or too difficult to control, there will always be voices eager to bring you back down. That is why these discussions have generated such strong reactions. Many supporters see them not as objective evaluations of a player's performance, but as attempts to diminish someone whose impact has grown beyond what many expected. The conversation begins to sound less like basketball analysis and more like an effort to remind a rising star that there are people uncomfortable with just how brightly she shines.
You know, we went through a lot, and just to see everyone kind of come together and everyone contributed, got, positive reinforcement that everyone is needed. And so I think that's always good for a team, especially going into that time of season and then playoffs. So it's good. But that's last year. This year is completely different. And so we got to dial in today and get better offensively and defensively.
You guys probably aren't, I don't want to speak for you, but you're probably not where you want to be right now,
Correct.
sitting at 500.
Yep.
So how could this be the start of another turning point for the whole season, even though it's early?
Yeah, I think it's something to look forward to, a goal to reach that's in season. I think that's the whole point. A little bit more money for everybody, which is nice, it's not $30K, by the way, if anyone's wondering.
For months, a particular storyline has continued to circulate around Caitlin Clark. Critics have portrayed her as someone with an oversized ego, suggesting that the attention surrounding her has created a sense of entitlement. Some narratives even go as far as claiming that she sees herself as bigger than the Indiana Fever, and that her growing stardom has created tension behind the scenes. It's the kind of story that naturally attracts attention. Controversy drives, clicks, sparks debate, and keeps people talking. The idea of a young superstar clashing with her team creates endless headlines and gives critics plenty of material to discuss. As a result, the narrative has gained traction across social media, podcasts, and sports talk shows. The problem, however, is that the people closest to the situation have often painted a very different picture, while outside observers continue to speculate about Clark's attitude and influence. Many of the individuals who actually share the locker room with her have pushed back against those claims. Their comments challenge the assumption that there is some major divide within the team and raise an important question. If those around Clark aren't describing her the way critics are, how much of the narrative is based on reality and how much is based on perception? That disconnect is what makes the debate so fascinating. On one side, there is a media-driven story that continues to gain attention. On the other, there are voices from within the organization suggesting that the situation may look very different from the inside.
Blatant,
But
verifiable
I
lie.
do think that it gives you just something positive to look forward to and to work towards, and sometimes you need that in-season motivation.
What is the level of frustration, if at all, with the team right now?
Yeah, it's we have all the pieces, and now you just got to put the puzzle together. And I think that each year has growing pains, and we're in that right now. Like I said, we have all the pieces we need, but it's owning your role, knowing your role, and also just like being tough. We're just too soft right now, and that's not what our identity is, and so we need to get away from that.
Then came Kelsey Mitchell, one of the Indiana Fever's most respected veterans and a player who knows exactly what goes on behind closed doors. Ironically, Mitchell is often mentioned in discussions claiming that Caitlin Clark's rise has somehow overshadowed other players on the team. So when she was asked directly about Clark and her presence within the organization, people paid attention. Mitchell's response left little room for interpretation. Rather than reinforcing the popular narrative circulating online and in the media, she offered a completely different perspective. She made it clear that despite the extraordinary attention surrounding Clark, she has never carried herself as if she were above the team or larger than the organization. According to Mitchell, Clark has fit naturally into every part of the team's environment, from the locker room and practice facility to game nights on the court. There was no suggestion of entitlement, no indication that she expected special treatment, and no sign of the attitude that critics have repeatedly accused her of having. That testimony carries weight because it comes from someone who experiences the reality of the situation firsthand. Teammates see the daily habits, the interactions, the work ethic, and the way a player handles success and adversity. Those who spend every day alongside Clark have a perspective that outsiders simply do not, and that is where the disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. While some commentators continue to speculate about ego, chemistry issues, or star treatment, the voices inside the organization often tell a very different story. The people sharing the court with Clark describe a teammate who has integrated into the group and earned respect through her actions, while many of the harshest criticisms continue to come from those observing from a distance rather than living the experience themselves.
Caitlin Clark downplays sideline spat with Coach Stephanie White. Those things happen all the time. Not like we saw the other day. Again, there was hate and venom in Stephanie White's eyes, and you could see it. You could see it. That's not how this happens. The Indiana Star, or Indianapolis Star, Indiana Fever star Caitlin Clark and Coach Stephanie White debunk any rumors.
What we're witnessing feels like a larger battle over the future direction of the league. On one side stands a once-in-a-generation talent whose primary focus appears to be winning basketball games, backed by teammates who consistently acknowledge her impact on the team. On the other side are critics and influential voices who remain skeptical of the massive attention and influence she has accumulated in such a short period of time. The tension goes beyond wins and losses. It has become a debate about who gets to shape the conversation around the sport and how a player with unprecedented popularity should be viewed. While supporters see Caitlin Clark as a transformative figure capable of elevating the league to new heights, others seem far more cautious about the speed and scale of her rise. Yet history has shown that extraordinary athletes are rarely defined by outside criticism. Public debates, controversial headlines, and endless commentary may dominate the news cycle, but they do not ultimately determine a player's legacy. Performance, resilience, and results have a way of speaking louder than any narrative. That is why many of Clark's supporters believe attempts to diminish her influence are unlikely to succeed. You cannot slow down elite talent through discussion alone, and you cannot erase impact simply because it makes people uncomfortable. If anything, resistance often becomes fuel for the athletes who thrive under pressure. Caitlin Clark has already altered the landscape of women's basketball in ways few could have predicted. Whether people celebrate that reality or challenge it, the momentum behind her rise continues to grow. And if her career follows the trajectory many expect, the conversations happening today may eventually be remembered as the early chapters of a transformation that was impossible to stop.